This is East Idaho Newsmakers with Nate Eaton.
Welcome to East Idaho Newsmakers. Thanks for being here today. We have Congressman Mike Simpson in our studio today. We were just talking that 11 terms. Does it feel like you've been in 11 terms?
No, it doesn't. It actually goes really rapidly. And when I started in 1998 was when I first ran, and then took office in, 99, I guess, or 2000. But it goes really rapidly. I would have never suspected I was going to be here for 21, and next year will be 22 years, and then up for re-election next year.
And are you going to run again?
Yes.
You are? You're not retiring?
No. There's still some really important things I want to do that need a lot of work. Immigration, I'd like to see that resolved. And as I said Tuesday at the Andrus Center, I want to see salmon back in Idaho. I want to see healthy runs of salmon come back. And right now they're just declining. So we've got to do something about that. And there are an awful lot of other issues that need to be addressed.
I want to talk about the issues in a minute here, but I want to also talk about your background, because you're a local boy, just down the street in Blackfoot.
Yep.
Born and raised, right?
I was born in Burley, and we moved to Blackfoot when I was 6 years old, when my dad got out of the Marines. He was in Korea, and then we moved to Blackfoot, and he started his dental practice there.
And you grew up there?
Grew up there, went to high school, graduated from Blackfoot High School. Went to Utah State University for my undergraduate studies, because all of my family went to Utah State, so it was just kind of like our next high school. So I went down there, and then I studied political science when I first went, but I didn't know what you'd do with a political science degree. So I went into pre-dentistry, and because I like the biological sciences also, and ended up going to dental school in St. Louis for 4 years, and then we moved back and went into practice with my dad and my uncle in Blackfoot, and practiced there for 22 years till I got elected to Congress.
So how do you go from being a dentist working on people's teeth to saying, maybe I want to go into government?
My dad said it was a defective chromosome is what it was. But I was the first one in our family to ever really go into politics or anything, and I enjoyed the study of politics, and I always wanted the policy making side of it. I didn't want to just go work for the government or something like that. But that meant you had to get up and give speeches and that kind of stuff, and I was really a very shy kid. And so I got out of dental school. I was practicing, and one morning I went and picked up the Blackfoot Morning News, and it said that there were 2 seats open on the city council, and only one person had filed, and the filing deadline was the next day. So I said, aha, maybe this is how you get elected without having to give all those speeches. Other people thought that too, and 5 other people filed too.
Really?
Then we had a race, and we knew who would win the most votes for the 1 seat. So the other 5 of us were running really for the 2nd seat, and I won by 16 votes, or by 8 votes. I won 1,016 to 1,008.
8 votes.
Yeah, and if I had not won by that 8 votes, I would probably still be practicing dentistry or retired from it. Yeah, because having to get I can remember the League of Women Voters put on the debates. It was the first debate. And I can remember getting ready for that and saying to my wife, do you really think they'd notice if I wasn't there? Because it was just, public speaking is the most fearful thing that most people put as number 1, is their most feared thing to do.
Sure.
And I was actually in high school and stuff, I was always one of those kids that was in the back of the class and stuff, and never really spoke up and that type of thing. But I got elected, and once you get elected and you start giving speeches and stuff like that, it's okay, you get used to it. Still get nervous anytime you have to give one, but if you're speaking about something you know something about, then it's okay.
So you won the city council election, and have you won every election since?
Since then, yeah.
Never lost?
Never lost. The only election that I actually lost was a House race for leadership. I ran for Speaker against Tom Boyd. I was the Assistant Majority Leader, and he'd been Speaker for 4 years, and I decided to run against him, and I lost that race. It's only the members of the Republican Conference that vote on it in Boise, and I lost it 33 to 30. So that's the only race I've lost. Every public race I've won. Yeah.
Did you ever think about running for Senate?
Not really. When it looked like Larry Craig was going to resign during his troubles and stuff, and not finish out his term, and then at that point the governor appoints the next senator to fill the unfinished term. And Butch had become governor, and Butch and I were really good friends. And Butch called me and said, do you want to go for the Senate if Larry resigns? And it took me about 15 seconds to say no, because I don't think it was best for the state of Idaho, and I don't think it was best for me personally. Senate's just a different institution, and I've always been a House member. And I was on the Appropriations Committee in the House, and Larry was on the Appropriations Committee in the Senate. So we had actually from Idaho really powerful delegation in terms of the appropriations process and stuff. So if Larry had resigned and I'd gone over to the Senate, would have lost both those seats on the Appropriations Committee. So I decided I liked where I was. I liked the seniority I'd built up in the House because Congress works on a seniority-based system. And I'd liked that seniority, and I was getting up to where I was going to be a cardinal, and then became one, and that's one of the chairmen of the subcommittees that appropriate the money. And so I'd never really thought about running for the Senate.
There's going to be people watching. We hear about appropriations all the time. Yeah. What exactly is appropriations? What does that mean?
That's the money we appropriate to fund the federal government, the activities around the country. If you look at the federal budget altogether is about $4 trillion. That includes Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all of the things that are what are called mandatory funding. That means those programs, if you qualify for a program, you get that benefit whether we have any money or not, because it's mandatory. The only way to change the spending on those programs is to change the underlying law. The other $1 trillion, that's about $3 trillion of the four. The other $1 trillion is what's called discretionary spending. That's what we spend every year on the military, on the veterans, on the Department of Interior and Forest Service, the Energy and Water Appropriation Bill, Department of Commerce. You go through those, there's 12 appropriation bills. That's all discretionary. And that means Congress determines what the levels of those various activities are going to be.
Okay. What do you say to the people watching that just are can't follow politics anymore because of everything happening in D.C.? Have you seen it like this since 1999, 2000 when you went into the House?
I've never seen it as partisan as it is currently. I've seen it getting this way, but this is the most partisan I've ever seen. Part of it is because, you know, the public is kind of divided also. And Congress reflects that. But we're even more partisan than the general public, I think. It is, you don't see many bipartisan efforts to try to solve problems. And that's really what it takes, whether it's going to be immigration or any of these other things, or resolving how we deal with Social Security and Medicare that are going to break this country if we don't change the system somewhat. It's going to take a bipartisan effort. It started 10 years ago when the Tea Party became active, and on the far right they became very, very active, and we elected a bunch of people that were called the Freedom Caucus, that, you know, it's either my way or the highway sort of guys. They didn't understand the word compromise. And now we've got Democrats facing the same situation with their far left on the progressive part of the Democratic Party. And I talked to Steny Hoyer the other day, who is the Democratic Majority Leader from Maryland. He's a good friend of mine. We've worked on different projects together. And I said to him, he was walking down the aisle, and I said, Steny, I said, I got to tell you in all honesty, it saddens me, but I sit over in my corner and I watch you dealing with the same situation that John Boehner and Paul Ryan had to deal with in trying to keep your conference together, you know. And Steny said, I've been trying to convince the media that there are 62 freshman Democrats, but they think there's only 3. And that's the challenge that he has. It's the same thing that Boehner had. But, you know, the real question I've asked over the years, as it's gotten more and more partisan, and the method in which people get their news is so different than it used to be. When I was a kid, there was Walter Cronkite, and everybody believed whatever Walter Cronkite said. And now you can get your news from any source in the world. You know, the internet is where a majority of people get their news anymore. But you turn on the TV at night, cable news, you watch Fox News, you get one opinion, you watch MSNBC, you get a different opinion, but you would never know they were talking about the same subject, because it has become so partisan in that arena. And if all you're watching is one of those cable shows or something, you're not getting the full story. You're not getting the real news. You're just getting one point of view. So it's, how do the American people determine whether what they're hearing and the news they're receiving is accurate and true or not? That's a challenge.
Yeah. Speaking of Democrats, Joe Biden announced this week he's running. Where do you foresee the presidential election going? Is this going to be a repeat of the Republicans 2 years ago when there were 16 on the stage, 2 different debates? How do you foresee things playing out? It's
going to be a mess, just like it was with the Republican primary, but they'll get through that. Who will win, I have no idea. While I've known Joe Biden for a number of years, and I think he's a good politician and would do a decent job there, he's not the guy I would endorse, and philosophically he's different than I am.
But he's a little bit more moderate
Democrat.
He's a
little bit more moderate. And the question is who's going to become the face of the Democratic Party over the next year? Is it going to be that far right progressive wing, that AOC wing, or Omar, or any of these people that are out there pushing the Democratic further and further to the left? Is it going to be them, or is it going to be someone who is a centrist that has a chance of winning in the general election? I don't know how that's going to turn out yet.
Bet you're glad it's not your side, though.
I'm glad it's not our side of the aisle.
All right, immigration, how does it get fixed?
Surprisingly, I think the immigration crisis that we're currently having at the border, with the caravans coming and everything, may help us solve this problem. And I mean, that sounds counterintuitive. But for the last 2 years, all the Democrats have said this is a manufactured crisis. Trump's just doing a manufactured crisis to build his wall and to enact all these laws and all this kind of stuff. And it's not a manufactured crisis. And now they're starting to see that and actually say, well, yeah, it might be a little bit of a problem down there that we need to address. So maybe it's going to force some Democrats and Republicans to get together to try to solve this problem. And there's several aspects of the immigration problem. One is, how do you stop all of these people that are just coming up on a caravan and claiming refugee status and so forth, And they've heard from all the coyotes that they pay money to, bring a child with you, because that means when you touch the border, the U.S. government can't do anything to you except put you in detention. They don't have enough detention. There's not enough courts to solve the problem, and consequently they got to release you. And 90% of the people that they release into the country don't come back for their court hearings. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is, what do you do with the 11 to 14 million people that are here illegally currently? And the other aspect is the DACA kids that were brought here as children, sometimes 3 and 4 years old, that don't know that they're here illegally until they go to get a driver's license or something, but they are illegal just like everybody else. What I've said is, give the DACA kids that this is the only country they've ever known. Many of them have served in our military, they're going to our colleges and so forth. You're going to deport them to where? To a country they've never known? This is the only country they've known. Give them citizenship. There's about 900,000 or something like that, estimates range. What do you do with the 11 to 14 million people that are here illegally? Anybody that sits down and looks at it knows you're not going to deport 11 to 14 million people, and it would devastate our economy. Most of these people are here because they want to improve their lives. They came here for the same reason you and I would if we were residents of Mexico making 10 cents a day or whatever, We want to improve our lives. And these are hardworking people, oftentimes that do jobs that they can't find Americans that want to do. So you're not going to deport them. If there are criminals in there, they've committed deportable actions, then deport those. The rest of them, give them permanent green card status. Let them stay here, let them work. If their grandmother dies in Honduras, let them go home to the funeral, come back and work, and that type of thing. But you don't give them citizenship. If they want to apply for citizenship, they go through the regular process. They go through the back of the line, so that they're not seen as having an advantage of jumping the line by coming in illegally. Now, that might take them several years to get citizenship, but I would bet that you would find most of those people, citizenship is not the big thing that's important to them. Being able to stay legally and be comfortable that nobody's going to come and knock on their door and all of a sudden ship them that night to Mexico, which happens. I think that would solve a lot of the problem. But you can't even get there unless you can convince the American people that we're doing everything on the border we can to stop the illegal flow. And that's why Trump's wall and his policies, I think, are the right thing to do. I'm not one who believes we need a wall from Brownsville to San Diego, from sea to shining sea. But there are some places where a wall is appropriate and necessary, and there are some places where increased technology, increased border agents are the right answer. And then we've got to increase the number of judges and federal courts we have, immigration courts that we have, to deal with these people that we do catch coming illegally. Last month they had 100,000 people that they caught coming across the border. That's only the ones they caught. Yeah. So how do you solve that? The American people got to be convinced we're doing everything we can on the border.
Social Security, a study just came out. I think it said that the money will be gone by 2035, something like that.
Yep.
How do you fix that for people like me that see that and think, well, why am I paying it?
I've been talking about Social Security now for probably the 20 years I've been in Congress. When Social Security started, there were 17 and a half or 16 and a half people working for every retiree. And the way the system works, it's the working population now that pays the Social Security of those retirees. There's not a little vault that they put your money into and save for when you retire. It's.
I wish there was.
Yeah, I wish so too. Yeah. But it was not set up that way because people started getting Social Security when it went into effect that had never paid a dime into it. So that's how it works. The working people today pay for the retirees of today. When it started, there were 17 and a half workers for every retiree, and the average lifespan was 64 years old. So that's a system that works out forever. Today, there are 2.5 workers for every retiree, and the average lifespan is like 84. The numbers just don't work out anymore. So you've got to change it somehow. And there are many different proposals out there. One of them would be to increase the cap on the total amount, or the level that you pay Social Security. Once you reach a certain income level, you don't pay Social Security anymore that year. You could increase that amount, and we've done that over the years. You could increase the age of retirement because it's no longer 65. The average lifespan is now into the 80s, You could increase the age of retirement. You could allow for a partial privatization. That is, if you could take 1/3 of your Social Security tax now and invest it for yourself, and just pay the 2/3 to the Social Security system, what you would end up with a much better retirement for yourself. All the numbers show. And the trade-off is you would only get 2/3 of your Social Security when you're retired because you hadn't paid into it fully. Most young people believe that would work for them. It's the older generation that goes, oh, we can't do that. That's going to be harmful. But the proposal that President Bush put forward said, if you're 55 years of age or older, you're in the Social Security system and you're going to get what's guaranteed to you. If you're younger than 55, you can make the decision. Do you want to stay in the system as it currently exists, or do you want to be able to invest part of it for yourself and stuff? So all of those types of discussions have to go on because this isn't the government's retirement system. This is the American people's retirement system. And we need to have an honest discussion with them that it does not work the way it currently goes into the future. The only reason they said 2035, it used to be like 2030, but as the economy grows, more people pay into the system, so it extends the life of the Social Security system. Yeah. So now it's 2035, and that'll vary up and down a little bit. But that doesn't leave us long to solve this problem. No. And every year we put off trying to solve the problem makes it harder and harder to deal with.
Sure. All right, let's talk about the salmon in Idaho. You made an announcement a few days ago about bringing salmon back. What does it, first of all, explain what the problem is and how you're trying to fix it.
Well, salmon runs in Idaho have been declining for the last 30 years. All 4 of the runs in Idaho are either threatened or endangered. And we don't have the numbers that are coming back to Idaho that we used to have. How does that impact us? The fishing industry in Idaho, the salmon fishing industry is huge. I can remember in Riggins when you used to go down there, you couldn't find a place to stand along the Salmon River for all the people fishing and stuff. We don't have those numbers returning anymore. And it's our district, the 2nd District of Idaho, that pays all the cost of the lower Snake dams that were put in the 70s, and that's when the numbers started to decline. We pay all the costs of those and get none of the benefits, actually. Out of Bonneville Power Administration, those are the dams that produce the hydropower. Those 4 produce like 3,000 kilowatt hours of power. But out of the entire Bonneville system, Idaho residents get about 6% of the benefit. And that was, at one time, BPA was the lowest cost energy. So Idaho Falls here, which is on the BPA system and their own, but they got a lower rate because of the BPA system didn't cost that much. Well, BPA is no longer the low-cost producer anymore. But we pay all of the costs in terms of losing our fishing in Idaho, and we also pay the cost by shipping 487,000 acre-feet of water out of Idaho every year to flush fish past dams. So all of the costs come on us, it seems like, and very little of the benefit. Most of the benefit goes to Washington and Oregon. It's the Bonneville Power Administration that lights Seattle and Portland. And and I've started asking the question, why are we paying the benefits and not getting why are we paying the costs and not getting the benefits? And besides that, I want salmon back in Idaho. It's called the Salmon River for a reason. And we need to do all we can. Does that involve taking out dams? There's more than just taking out dams. We've got a culture and a society that's been built up around those dams, whether it's through barging or other types of things, the grain producers that barge their grain down the river, the energy that's produced there in Port of Lewiston, farthest inland port in the country. has an impact on them, and you can't just ignore all those impacts if you were to take those dams out. And so there's much more than just dams that you have to look at. You have to look at the fishing harvests in the ocean. Do we allow enough salmon to come back into the river with that before we catch them? If elk were endangered in Idaho, I guarantee there wouldn't be an elk season next year. But yet we fish for these endangered salmon, and we maybe overharvest them out in the ocean. We have predators all along the river that know when salmon are going to be released when we barge them around dams, because it's like a smorgasbord, you know? They're not dumb. Can we control the predators better? Water quality is a huge issue for returning salmon. So it seems like the debate always comes down to the dams. Take the dams out, don't take the dams out. If that's all the debate is, then it's, you've lost perspective on how to get salmon back. So it's all of those things that have got to be addressed. It's a huge issue. And Bonneville Power Administration right now is, for lack of a better term, going broke, because they're no longer the low-cost producer of energy in the Pacific Northwest. And so we've got to solve the BPA problem. You can't solve that problem without solving the salmon problem. You can't solve the salmon problem without talking about the dams. Neither can you solve salmon or the dams without talking about BPA. So they're all intertwined. Maybe this is the opportunity we need. Try to put together a Northwest Power Planning Act 2.0 and solve a few of these problems.
The day we're taping this, it's Bring Your Kid to Work Day.
Yeah.
And one of our employees has his son
I've got a
here.
couple of my staff to work.
Yeah, there you go.
It's same thing.
They're here. He had a question. He didn't want to come on camera and ask it, but he was recently diagnosed with diabetes. And the price of insulin is causing havoc to their family and families across the country. As a congressman, what can you do and what can you say to those families that are fighting not just insulin, but drug prices overall?
Yeah, drug prices overall. First, let me say to you, I'm sorry that you've been diagnosed with diabetes. My dad was a diabetic, and so he was taking insulin every day, and I'm kind of pre-diabetic in that I take metformin and stuff by pill and stuff, but all of those medications are very, very expensive. And how do you, the biggest purchaser of drugs in the United States is the federal government. Because we have the VA system, we have the Medicaid system, we have the Medicare system, and all of that type of thing. Yet we don't negotiate drug prices. Other countries negotiate drug prices. Germany negotiates a drug price, and if the drug company from the United States doesn't meet their price, and they lose that business, they go, well, that's like 0.1% of our overall business, So they don't care. They actually give them prices that are below cost of production to keep the business. And who makes up for that? It's the American citizen. Yeah. I think we ought to be able to, the federal government ought to be able to negotiate drug prices with the federal government for the programs that are federal. I think we ought to be able to re-import drugs from countries that have a standard that's similar to the United States. I don't want to import drugs from Venezuela or whatever. But if a country like Canada that has an FDA sort of regulatory regime like the United States does that makes sure they're safe and effective drugs, I think you ought to be able to take your prescription and go to Canada and get it filled and come back into the United States. Now, the drug companies don't like to hear that, because all of a sudden you're going to be getting drugs at probably half the cost that you would here in the United States. Yeah. But it's certainly a part of it. The other thing I would do, and this was if I was just king for a day, it'll never happen, but being a dentist and one who prescribes drugs and stuff when I was in practice, I can remember sitting down and I was watching TV one night and this advertisement came on TV for this drug, and I was going, that's interesting, I hadn't heard about that before. And then at the end it said, available by prescription only. And I'm asking myself, why are you advertising a prescription drug that you can't go buy unless you go to a doctor? We never allowed that in the past, but now I talk to doctors and they will have patients come in and they will have seen this commercial of two kids or two people sitting in a bathtub out in the forest somewhere, whatever that commercial is. But they will come in and say, I want that drug, and the doctor will say, well, the generic we've got you on right now is working fantastically and it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. This drug is 3 times as expensive. I want that drug because they've seen, I want to feel like those guys. And so the doctor will write it, because if he doesn't, they'll go down the street and get it written for somebody else. That's advertising does what it's supposed to do. Same reason they advertise jeans. It increases sales. And that's, we need to be using more and more generic drugs where it's appropriate. It's not always appropriate. Sometimes the brand name drugs are the ones that a doctor wants to prescribe, but generics work in an awful lot of the cases. We need to be using more of those, and we ought to make it so that when a drug company gets a patent on a drug, and we give them a patent so that they can reclaim the costs of inventing that drug and all the testing and research that went through. It's over $1 billion to get a new drug on the market now. So that they can recover those costs. But drug companies have a way of changing that just as their patent's ready to run out, adding a little something here or there so it's a different patent, you know. We need to address that issue too. So there's a lot of things that we need to do to try and bring down the price of drugs. But, you know, you can see a steady curve or steady incline from the day they started advertising drugs on television, and the cost of drugs and the cost of medicine.
It's true. I see those commercials though and just get distracted by all the side effects.
I know.
Potentially
I know.
have.
Well, you know, it's interesting. Some of them, they don't list the side effects. And what I found out is if they don't list if they don't tell you specifically what the drug is for, like this is to treat type 2 diabetes, they don't have to list any of the side effects. If they say this is to treat type 2 diabetes, they have to list the side effects. Kind of interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. It could just be talk about how you could feel good or whatever, just don't talk about what it treats.
Yep.
Well, there's so much more we could talk about, Congressman. We'll have to have you back, especially if you're running next year. Congressman Mike Simpson, thank you for coming in to East Idaho Newsmakers. And let's talk real quick about the street that was named after you near the INL.
Yeah, we're going to have a reception over here. They're going to do the official dedication of M.K. Simpson Boulevard. I'm not sure whether they meant Michael Keith Simpson Boulevard or Mary Catherine, my wife, Simpson Boulevard, or Mike and Kathy Simpson Boulevard.
Works. That works.
I said it works any way you want to take it. So,
or someone might think the Simpsons television show or
well,
something.
and she was very instrumental in getting the funding that actually created the utility corridor that allowed all those buildings for the INL to be built along that street. So
it works. Great.
Yep.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Appreciate
sir.
it.
Thank you for watching. Have a good week.